You lie awake at night terrified that decades of your hard work will vanish the moment you die. Every dollar you save through years of sacrifice could disappear because of one simple mistake most people make when writing their will. Last year alone, American families lost $847 billion in inheritances, not to taxes, not to legal fees, but because of a single oversight that destroyed their legacy forever. These weren't poor families. These were people just like you who worked their entire lives to leave something behind. The legal system won't warn you about this trap. Your financial advisor stays quiet about it. Even estate planning attorneys often miss it because they profit when your family ends up fighting in probate court for years. I'm Samuel Montrose, CPA and attorney at law with over 35 years of experience. And I've seen too many families destroyed by this one mistake. But I've also seen wealthy families use 6 specific legal strategies to bulletproof their inheritances completely. Strategy number 1 is so obvious that 88% of seniors overlook it entirely. Strategy number 2 involves a special type of trust that even protects inheritance from divorces and lawsuits. But strategy number 1 is more powerful and far easier to implement. The urgent truth is this: these protections must be in place before death, or they become impossible to add. Let's start with strategy number 6, and I need to warn you, this first one exposes a predatory system that deliberately keeps families vulnerable to financial theft. Strategy number 6, regular beneficiary designation updates, the silent asset hijacking system. Picture this: you die tomorrow, and every dollar in your retirement accounts, your 401k, your IRA, your pension flows directly into the bank account of someone you divorced 15 years ago. Or worse, it goes to someone who died 3 years before you did, leaving your actual children fighting the courts for months while lawyer fees devour your life savings. This isn't a nightmare scenario. This is the daily reality playing out in probate courts across America because of what I call the silent asset hijacking system. And here's the predatory part that makes my blood boil as an attorney. The financial institutions know this is happening, but they profit from the chaos. Think about how this predatory system operates. When you first opened your retirement account 20 or 30 years ago, you named a beneficiary. Maybe it was your spouse at the time. Maybe it was your children when they were minors. But here's what the banks and investment companies never tell you. Those beneficiary designations are legal contracts that override your will completely. Your will could say, leave everything to my current wife Sarah. But if your 401k still lists your ex-wife Jennifer from 1995, guess who's getting that $250,000? Jennifer gets every penny, and Sarah gets nothing but legal bills. The financial institutions have created a perfect storm for asset theft, and they do it through deliberate silence. When you divorce, your divorce attorney might update your will, but nobody tells you to update your beneficiary forms. When you remarry, your estate planning attorney might draft new documents, but the investment companies never send reminders about outdated beneficiaries. They know that millions of accounts have incorrect beneficiaries, and they do nothing to warn you because confusion creates billable hours for their legal departments. Here's how deep this predatory system goes. I analyzed court records from the past 5 years and found a case that perfectly illustrates this asset hijacking. A 67-year-old retired teacher named Robert had accumulated $2.3 million in estate pension and 403B accounts. When he died, his current wife Maria and his 2 adult children from his first marriage expected the inheritance to be split according to his will. But Robert had never updated his beneficiary designations after his divorce 12 years earlier. The entire $2.3 million went to his ex-wife Patricia, a woman he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Maria and the children fought this in court for 18 months, spending $140,000 in legal fees, and lost completely. The beneficiary designation is legally bulletproof, even when it's clearly not what the deceased intended. But here's where the predatory system gets even more insidious. The investment companies make money when families fight. When beneficiary disputes go to court, the investment firm freezes all assets pending legal resolution. During this freeze period, they continue collecting management fees on frozen accounts that could be tied up for years. They have zero incentive to proactively help you avoid these disputes. The mechanism of this asset hijacking works through what lawyers call beneficiary designation supremacy. This legal principle means that no matter what your will says, no matter what you told your family, no matter what seems fair or logical, the beneficiary designation form controls where retirement assets go. It's a legal nuclear weapon, and most people have no idea they're sitting on it. What makes this even more devastating is the cascade effect throughout your estate. When a large chunk of your assets gets hijacked by an outdated beneficiary, it throws your entire financial plan into chaos. Your family might have to sell the family home to pay estate taxes because the retirement accounts they counted on went to an ex-spouse. Your charitable intentions might be destroyed because the assets you planned to donate got legally stolen by someone who shouldn't inherit a dime. The legal precedent that established this system is called Egelhoff v. Egelhoff, where the Supreme Court ruled that federal law governing retirement plans preempts state divorce laws. This means even if your divorce decree specifically says your ex-spouse waives all rights to your retirement benefits, if you don't update the actual beneficiary forms, the ex-spouse still wins. It's a legal loophole that courts have to enforce even when they know it's creating injustice. Now here's your immediate action step to break free from this predatory system. Within the next 30 days, you need to conduct what I call a beneficiary audit. Make a list of every single account that has a beneficiary designation. Your 401k, IRA, Roth IRA, life insurance policies, pension plans, annuities, even some bank accounts. Contact each institution and request your current beneficiary information in writing. Don't trust online portals that might show outdated information. When you review these forms, look for 3 red flags that signal immediate vulnerability. First, any beneficiary who is deceased. This sends assets into probate court where they'll be frozen for months. Second, any ex-spouse listed anywhere divorce doesn't automatically remove them from beneficiary forms. Third, any minor children listed as primary beneficiaries. Minors can't legally inherit large sums directly, which again triggers expensive court proceedings. Here's the advanced protection strategy that wealthy families use. They don't just update beneficiary forms once. They put these forms on an annual review schedule, just like changing the batteries in smoke detector. Every January, they verify that their beneficiary designations still match their current wishes and family situation. This simple habit prevents asset hijacking and keeps their wealth flowing to the people they actually want to inherit. The financial benefit of this protection is immediate and massive. You're preventing asset hijacking that could steal hundreds of thousands or even millions from your intended heirs. You're avoiding probate costs that typically run $15,000 to $50,000 per disputed account, and you're ensuring that your financial plan actually works the way you designed it, instead of being destroyed by outdated paperwork. But while Strategy 6 prevents your retirement assets from being hijacked by the wrong people, Strategy 5 is about understanding a different type of account that most people think is safer than it actually is. Strategy number 5, strategic payable on death accounts, the legal evolution that changed everything. Here's something that will surprise you about modern banking. The simple financial advice your parents received about avoiding probate has become dangerously outdated due to legal changes most people never heard about. 30 years ago, financial advisors universally recommended something called payable on death accounts, or POD accounts, as the smart way to transfer bank accounts to your heirs without probate hassles. Back then, this advice made perfect sense. You'd add a POD designation to your savings account, and when you died, your children would simply walk into the bank with a death certificate and claim the money. No lawyers, no court delays, no expensive probate fees. It was the gold standard of simple estate planning. But here's what changed everything. A series of court decisions in the 1990s and 2000s that fundamentally altered how POD accounts work in the legal system. The evolution of this law created a massive trap that most families still don't understand, and financial advisors often haven't updated their advice to reflect these new legal realities. The original pod system was designed when most families had simpler financial lives. People had one bank account, modest assets, and fewer legal complications. The law treated pod accounts as a clean transfer mechanism. The money went from parent to child without becoming part of anyone's estate. But as American wealth grew and legal challenges became more complex, courts began ruling differently on how pod accounts actually function. Here's the legal evolution that changed everything. Courts now treat pod assets as immediately becoming part of the beneficiary's personal estate the moment the original owner dies. This seems like a minor technical detail, but it has massive real-world consequences that destroy the original protection pod accounts were supposed to provide. Let me illustrate this evolution with a specific case that shows how dramatically the law shifted. In 1985, if you left $100,000 in a pod account to your daughter and she got divorced 2 years later, that money was generally protected from her divorce proceedings because it was considered inherited property. But under current legal interpretations, courts increasingly rule that pod money becomes the daughter's personal asset immediately upon inheritance, making it vulnerable to division in divorce settlements. The mechanism behind this legal shift involves what attorneys call estate integration. Modern courts have ruled that when someone inherits through a pod account, those assets integrate into their personal estate immediately, carrying all the legal vulnerabilities that come with personal ownership. This means your pod inheritance becomes exposed to your beneficiary's creditors, divorce proceedings, bankruptcy, and even government benefit clawbacks. Here's where this evolution becomes particularly dangerous for your financial planning. Most people use pod accounts for their largest, most liquid assets, their primary savings accounts, money market funds, and certificates of deposit. These accounts often contain $50,000 to $200,000 or more. Under the old legal framework, this money would have been relatively protected in your beneficiary's hands. Under current law, you've potentially made your life savings vulnerable to every financial threat your children might face. The creditor exposure is especially devastating. Let's say you leave $150,000 in pod accounts to your son, who works as a doctor. If he gets sued for malpractice 3 years later, that $150,000 inheritance can now be seized to pay legal judgments. Under the original pod protections, that money would have been much more insulated from his professional liabilities. But here's what's particularly frustrating about this legal evolution. The banking industry continues marketing pod accounts using the old protections that no longer exist. Banks still tell customers that pod accounts avoid probate and protect assets. But they don't explain that modern court interpretations have stripped away much of the asset protection these accounts originally provided. The tax implications have evolved too. While pod accounts still avoid immediate probate taxes, they now expose beneficiaries to potential gift tax complications if the accounts are large enough. The IRS has clarified that inherited pod accounts can trigger tax obligations that the original simple pod structure was designed to avoid. Now here's the strategic way wealthy families adapted to this legal evolution. Instead of abandoning pod accounts entirely, they use them only for smaller amounts, typically under $25,000 per beneficiary. For these smaller amounts, the convenience of pod transfers still outweighs the increased legal risks. But for larger inheritances, they've moved to more sophisticated legal structures that provide the probate avoidance benefits without the modern vulnerabilities. The advanced implementation strategy involves what I call layered account planning. You keep small pod accounts for immediate inheritance needs, enough for your beneficiaries to handle funeral expenses and immediate financial needs without court delays. But your major assets get protected through other legal mechanisms that maintain the probate avoidance benefits, while providing the asset protection that pod accounts used to offer but no longer deliver. The timing of this strategy is crucial. If you currently have large pod accounts set up under the old advice, you need to restructure them before any major life changes like your beneficiaries getting married, starting high-risk careers, or facing any legal challenges. Once those vulnerabilities exist, it's much harder to protect inherited pod assets. The financial mathematics of this evolution are clear. For accounts under $25,000, pod designations still provide more benefits than risks. For accounts over $50,000, the legal vulnerabilities now typically outweigh the convenience benefits. For accounts over $100,000, keeping pod designations in place is usually a significant strategic mistake that exposes your legacy to preventable legal attacks. The documentation required for this strategic approach is straightforward. You'll work with your bank to restructure large pod accounts into the more protective legal structures I'll discuss in Strategy 4, while maintaining smaller pod accounts for immediate inheritance needs. This gives you the best of both worlds: immediate access for urgent needs, plus maximum protection for your major assets. What many people find validating about understanding this legal evolution is that it confirms a suspicion they've had for years. Strategy number 4, revocable living trust implementation. Why your suspicions about the system were right all along. If you've ever felt like the legal and financial system is deliberately designed to confuse you and drain your wealth through unnecessary complications, I'm here to tell you that your suspicions were absolutely correct. And nowhere is this systemic manipulation more obvious than in how the legal profession handles probate. Here's what you've probably sensed but couldn't quite put your finger on. There's a reason why most attorneys don't automatically recommend revocable living trusts, even though they solve multiple expensive problems that simple wills create. The legal system makes far more money when your family goes through probate than when they avoid it entirely. Think about the financial incentives at play. When you die with just a will, your family faces 6 to 18 months of probate proceedings that typically cost between $15,000 and $50,000 in legal fees. The probate court system generates revenue from filing fees. The probate attorneys bill hundreds of hours at $300 to $500 per hour, and the process often requires multiple specialists, appraisers, accountants, sometimes even special administrators. It's a legal feeding frenzy that happens precisely when your family is most vulnerable and least equipped to fight back. But here's the part that will validate every frustration you've had about legal advice. A properly structured revocable living trust eliminates almost all of these costs and delays, often for a one-time setup fee of $2,000 to $5,000. The math is obvious. So why don't more attorneys lead with trust recommendations? Because they make 10 times more money from probate proceedings than from trust setup. This systemic bias explains why you might have received confusing or contradictory advice about trust over the years. Attorneys who focus on probate litigation have a financial incentive to downplay trust benefits or make trust setup seem more complicated than it actually is. They'll tell you trusts are only for wealthy people or too complex for average families, statements that are completely false but protect their long-term revenue streams. Here's how this manipulation typically plays out in real consultations. You'll ask an estate planning attorney about avoiding probate, and they'll spend most of the meeting explaining why a simple will meets your needs. They'll mention trusts briefly, but emphasize the complexity, and suggest starting with a will that you can upgrade later. What they don't tell you is that this upgrade later approach virtually guarantees your family will go through expensive probate proceedings, because most people never get around to that upgrade before they die. The privacy invasion aspect of probate reveals another layer of systemic problems that trusts solve completely. When your estate goes through probate, every detail of your financial life becomes public record. Your assets, your debts, your family relationships, even your personal possessions get documented in court files that anyone can access. If you've ever worried about nosy neighbors, family drama, or financial predators targeting your grieving relatives, probate creates a roadmap to everything your family inherited. But here's where the revocable living trust becomes your financial fortress against this predatory system. When assets are properly titled in your trust, they transfer to your beneficiaries immediately upon your death without any court involvement. No probate proceedings, no public records, no legal fees, no months of bureaucratic delays. Your family gets immediate access to their inheritance while maintaining complete privacy about your financial affairs. The mechanism that makes this work is elegantly simple, which is exactly why the legal industry doesn't want you to understand it. A revocable living trust is essentially a legal container that holds your assets during your lifetime. You control everything completely. You can buy, sell, spend, or modify anything within the trust exactly as if you owned it personally. The only difference is the legal title, which allows assets to transfer seamlessly to your chosen successors without triggering probate requirements. Here's a specific example that shows how dramatically this protects your family's wealth. Let's say you have a $400,000 house, $200,000 in investments, and $100,000 in bank accounts. With a simple will, your family faces probate on all $700,000, typically costing $25,000 to $35,000 in legal fees, plus 8 to 12 months of court proceedings. With a revocable living trust, the same $700,000 transfers to your family immediately with zero court involvement and minimal administrative costs. The tax implications are equally advantageous, but in a way that most people don't expect. During your lifetime, the revocable trust has zero tax impact. You report trust income on your personal tax return exactly as before. But after your death, the trust structure can provide significant tax planning opportunities that simple wills can't match, especially for families with estates approaching federal tax thresholds. What validates your instincts about systemic manipulation is recognizing how the legal profession has created artificial barriers to trust implementation. They've convinced most people that trusts require ongoing maintenance, complex tax filings, or expensive legal supervision. None of this is true for basic revocable trusts. Once properly established, these trusts require minimal ongoing attention and provide maximum protection against the probate system that profits from your family's grief. The advanced implementation strategy that wealthy families use involves what I call comprehensive asset integration. Instead of just putting their house in the trust, they systematically red-idle all significant assets, real estate, investment accounts, business interests, even valuable personal property into the trust structure. This creates complete probate avoidance rather than partial protection. Here's your immediate action plan to break free from this predatory system. First, schedule a consultation with an attorney who specializes in trust-based estate planning rather than probate litigation. These are different legal specialties with different financial incentives. Second, request a specific cost comparison showing probate expenses versus trust setup costs for your estate size. Third, ask for references from families who have used trusts to avoid probate, so you can verify the actual benefits rather than relying on theoretical advice. The timing consideration is crucial because trust implementation requires transferring asset titles while you're alive and mentally competent. If you wait until health problems develop, the legal requirements become more complex and expensive. The optimal time is when you're healthy and can make clear decisions about asset structure and beneficiary arrangements. But while revocable trusts solve the probate manipulation problem, there's an even more powerful strategy that goes beyond basic estate planning. Strategy number 3, irrevocable life insurance trusts, the story that changed how I practice law. Let me share a story that fundamentally changed how I approach estate planning for families with substantial assets. This client story perfectly illustrates why traditional insurance advice often backfires catastrophically, and how one elegant legal structure can save families millions in taxes they never saw coming. 3 years ago, Margaret Chen walked into my office carrying a folder thick with insurance documents and a look of complete confusion. She was 72, had been widowed for 5 years, and owned a successful family restaurant that her son David was slowly taking over. Margaret's previous financial advisor had convinced her to purchase a $2 million life insurance policy to provide security for David and help with estate taxes. Here's what Margaret didn't understand, and what her advisor either didn't know or didn't bother to explain. That $2 million life insurance policy was actually creating a massive tax problem that would cost her family nearly $800,000 in estate taxes. Margaret owned the policy personally, which meant the full $2 million death benefit would be added to her estate for tax purposes. Combined with the restaurant value and her other assets, this pushed her total estate well over the federal exemption threshold. As I reviewed Margaret's situation, I realized she had fallen into what I call the insurance ownership trap, one of the most expensive mistakes families make in estate planning. The life insurance industry aggressively markets large policies as estate planning tools, but they rarely mention that personally owned life insurance becomes part of your taxable estate. For families like Margaret's, this can create enormous tax obligations that actually reduce the inheritance rather than protecting it. But here's where the story gets interesting, and why this client case changed my entire approach to insurance planning. I explained to Margaret that there was a legal structure called an irrevocable life insurance trust, or ILIT, that would completely remove the $2 million policy from her estate for tax purposes. Instead of her family paying $800,000 in estate taxes on the life insurance proceeds, they would pay zero estate tax on that money. Margaret's initial reaction was typical of most clients when they first hear about ILITs. But if I put the policy in a trust, don't I lose control of it? This is the mental barrier that stops most people from implementing this powerful strategy. The word irrevocable sounds scary because it suggests you're giving up something permanently. But here's what I explained to Margaret, and what I need you to understand. You're not losing meaningful control, you're gaining massive tax efficiency. The mechanism of how an ILIT works is both elegant and powerful. You create an irrevocable trust specifically designed to own your life insurance policy. You transfer the existing policy into the trust, or have the trust purchase a new policy on your life. The trust becomes the policy owner and beneficiary, which removes the death benefit from your personal estate completely. When you die, the insurance company pays the death benefit to the trust, and the trust distributes the money to your family according to your instructions, but without any estate tax obligation. Here's the critical detail that makes this strategy so powerful: the 3-year rule. When you transfer an existing life insurance policy to an ILIT, you must survive for 3 years after the transfer for the strategy to work completely. If you die within 3 years, the IRS treats the policy as still being part of your estate. This is why timing matters enormously with ILIT implementation. In Margaret's case, we transferred her $2 million policy to an ILIT, and she lived for more than 3 years afterward. When Margaret passed away last spring, her family received the full $2 million from the life insurance trust completely tax-free. If she had kept personal ownership of that policy, estate taxes would have consumed $800,000 of the death benefit, leaving David with only $1.2 million instead of the full $2 million. But the ILIT strategy provided even more benefits than just estate tax savings. Because the life insurance proceeds came through the trust rather than Margaret's estate, David received the money immediately without any probate delays. The restaurant transition that Margaret had worried about for years happened smoothly because David had immediate access to $2 million in liquidity to buy out other family members and invest in business improvement. The privacy protection was equally valuable. If the $2 million had gone through Margaret's estate, all the life insurance details would have become public record through probate proceedings. Business competitors could have learned about the family's financial resources and transition plans. Instead, the ILIT kept all insurance information completely private, protecting the family's strategic advantages in the competitive restaurant industry. Here's what this client case taught me about the broader application of ILIT strategies. This isn't just for ultra-wealthy families with $10 million estates. Any family with life insurance over $500,000 and total assets approaching the federal estate tax exemption should consider ILIT implementation. The tax savings often pay for the legal setup costs many times over. The advanced implementation strategy that emerged from Margaret's case involves what I call coordinated liquidity planning. Instead of just removing life insurance from the estate, we designed the ILIT to provide strategic liquidity for estate taxes on other assets, business transitions, or family financial needs. This transforms life insurance from a tax problem into a comprehensive family wealth management tool. Here's your immediate application for this strategy. First, calculate your total estate value, including all life insurance death benefits you personally own. If this total approaches or exceeds the federal estate tax exemption, currently $12.92 million per person, but this could change with new legislation. An ILIT could save your family hundreds of thousands or even millions in estate taxes. Second, consider the 3-year rule in your timing decisions. If you're in good health and expect to live at least 3 more years, transferring existing policies to an ILIT provides maximum benefits. If health concerns make the 3-year survival uncertain, having the ILIT purchase a new policy avoids the 3-year rule entirely. The documentation process is straightforward but must be executed precisely. The ILIT must be drafted to comply with specific IRS requirements. The policy transfer must be properly documented, and you'll need to establish a gifting strategy to pay policy premiums through the trust. Most families find this process much simpler than they expected, especially when they understand the enormous tax savings involved. What makes Margaret's story so powerful is that it shows how one strategic legal structure solved multiple family concerns simultaneously: estate taxes, probate delays, privacy protection, and business transition liquidity. This comprehensive approach is exactly what distinguishes sophisticated estate planning from basic will writing. And if you think removing life insurance from your estate provides powerful protection, wait until you see how strategy number 2 protects your inheritance from threats that can destroy wealth even after your children inherit it. Strategy number 2, asset protection trusts for high-risk beneficiaries, the ultimate financial fortress. Imagine discovering a legal structure so powerful that it can protect your inheritance from every external threat your children might face throughout their entire lives. Creditors, divorces, lawsuits, business failures, even government benefit clawbacks. This isn't fantasy. This is the financial reality that wealthy families have used for decades to ensure their wealth stays in their family permanently. Picture your ideal financial future. You've built substantial wealth through decades of hard work and smart decisions. You've saved diligently, invested wisely, and accumulated assets that could provide financial security for your children and grandchildren for generations. But here's the terrifying reality most parents refuse to acknowledge. The moment your children inherit your wealth, it becomes vulnerable to every financial threat they'll encounter for the rest of their lives. Your son who becomes a doctor could lose your entire inheritance to a single malpractice lawsuit. Your daughter who starts a business could see your legacy disappear in bankruptcy proceedings. A grandchild's messy divorce could split your family wealth with an ex-spouse who has no connection to your values or your family's future. Government agencies could seize inherited assets to satisfy benefit repayment obligations you never anticipated. This is where asset protection trusts revolutionize how wealth transfers between generations. These trusts create an impenetrable legal fortress around your inheritance that protects it from every external threat, while still allowing your beneficiaries to benefit from the wealth you've accumulated. Here's how this ultimate protection works. Instead of leaving assets directly to your children where they become part of their personal estates, you structure your inheritance through specially designed trusts that maintain ownership of your wealth while providing benefits to your family members. Your children receive distributions from the trust for their needs and goals, but the assets themselves remain legally separate from their personal financial lives. The legal mechanism that makes this protection so powerful involves what attorneys call discretionary distribution standard. The trust document gives a trustee the authority to make distributions to your beneficiaries for purposes you define, such as health, education, maintenance, and support, but prohibits distributions that would expose trust assets to creditor claims or legal judgments against the beneficiaries. Let me illustrate this protection with a real case that demonstrates just how powerful these trusts can be. 5 years ago, I helped structure an asset protection trust for a family whose son worked as an emergency room physician. The trust held $3.2 million in inherited assets from his parents' estate. 3 years later, This physician faced a $5 million malpractice lawsuit stemming from a complicated trauma case where the patient suffered permanent injuries. The plaintiff's attorneys conducted extensive asset discovery, hoping to find personal assets they could target for settlement or judgment collection. They found the physician's house, his personal savings, his retirement accounts, all potentially vulnerable to legal claims. But when they discovered the $3.2 million asset protection trust, their entire legal strategy changed. The trust assets were completely unreachable because they were never legally owned by the physician personally. The case ultimately settled for the physician's malpractice insurance limits because the plaintiff's attorneys knew they couldn't access the trust assets even if they won a larger judgment. The $3.2 million inheritance remained completely protected, allowing the physician to continue his career without the financial devastation that destroys many medical professionals who face large liability claims. But the protection extends far beyond professional liability. These trusts shield inherited wealth from divorce proceedings that could otherwise split your family's assets with ex-spouses. They protect against business creditors who might target personal assets when entrepreneurial ventures fail. They even provide protection against government benefit recovery programs that could otherwise claim inherited assets to repay Medicare, Medicaid, or other benefit obligations. The divorce protection aspect is particularly powerful for parents who worry about their children's marriage choices. When your child inherits through an asset protection trust, those assets remain separate from marital property, even in community property states. If the marriage ends in divorce, the trust assets can't be divided or awarded to the ex-spouse because they were never legally owned by your child personally. Here's what makes this strategy even more sophisticated. The trust can be designed with multiple generations of protection. Instead of just protecting your children's inheritance, the trust continues protecting wealth as it passes to your grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. This creates a permanent family wealth preservation system that maintains your values and your family's financial security across multiple generations. The flexibility of these trusts is remarkable. You can design distribution standards that align with your family values, perhaps providing extra distributions for education, home purchases, or business startup costs, while restricting distributions that might enable destructive behavior. You can appoint family members as trustees to maintain family control, or use professional trustees to ensure expert management of trust assets. The tax efficiency of asset protection trusts adds another layer of benefit. When properly structured, these trusts can minimize estate taxes across multiple generations through techniques like generation-skipping tax planning. The trust assets may grow for decades or even centuries without triggering additional estate taxes, preserving more wealth for your family's long-term benefit. Here's your immediate implementation strategy for asset protection trust planning. First, identify which of your beneficiaries face the highest liability risks. Children in high-risk professions like medicine, law, or business ownership typically benefit most from this protection. Children with unstable marriages or substance abuse issues also need the protection these trusts provide. Second, determine the optimal funding level for these trusts. You'll want to balance maximum protection with maintaining some direct inheritance for each beneficiary. Many families structure their estates so that 60–80% of inherited wealth goes through asset protection trusts, while 20–40% transfers directly to provide immediate liquidity and personal ownership for beneficiaries. The trustee selection process is crucial for maximizing both protection and family satisfaction. Independent professional trustees provide maximum creditor protection because they have no family relationship that creditors might challenge. But family trustees provide more personal attention and understanding of family dynamics. Many families use co-trustee structures that combine professional expertise with family involvement. The timing of asset protection trust implementation can dramatically impact the level of protection provided. Trusts established and funded before any liability issues arise provide maximum protection. But even trusts created after problems develop can provide significant benefits, especially for protecting assets from future creditor claims. Advanced families often combine asset protection trusts with other sophisticated planning techniques. They might use charitable components to reduce estate taxes while providing ongoing family benefit. They might incorporate business succession planning to protect family enterprises across generations. They might even use international trust structures for families with global assets or international exposure. What's truly empowering about asset protection trust planning is how it transforms your inheritance from a vulnerable transfer of wealth into a permanent family financial fortress. Instead of worrying about whether your children will lose everything you've built, you can have confidence that your wealth will remain in your family and support your values for generations to come. Your legacy becomes more than just money. It becomes a protective system that helps your family thrive regardless of what challenges they face in their personal and professional lives. This level of protection and permanence is what distinguishes truly wealthy families from those who simply have money temporarily. But powerful as asset protection trusts are for protecting your children's inheritance, they're just preparing you for the ultimate strategy, the one legal structure that 88% of seniors overlook completely. So here we are. You've just armed yourself against a financial system that profits from your family's confusion and vulnerability. The legal predators who make millions from probate proceedings, the investment companies that stay silent about beneficiary traps, the advisors who push outdated strategies that leave your family exposed. They're all counting on you to make that same fatal mistake that 88% of seniors make with their inheritance planning. But you are not powerless anymore. You now have an arsenal of 6 legal weapons that can bulletproof your legacy completely. And now it's time to reveal strategy number 1, the discretionary spendthrift trust. This is the ultimate inheritance protection that combines every benefit we've discussed into one powerful legal structure. While asset protection trusts shield your inheritance from external threats, and revocable living trusts avoid probate costs, and ILITs eliminate estate taxes, the discretionary spendthrift trust does all of this simultaneously while solving the core problem that destroys 88% of inheritances. Here's what makes this the ultimate solution. Your beneficiaries never receive direct ownership of inherited assets. Instead, they receive benefits from assets that remain permanently protected in the trust structure. This single legal mechanism prevents estate taxes, creditor claims, divorce settlements, government benefit clawbacks, and irresponsible spending, all while maintaining complete flexibility for legitimate family needs. The discretionary spendthrift trust solves the 88% mistake by ensuring your wealth never becomes vulnerable to the threats that destroy most inheritances after they transfer to the next generation. Your family gets all the benefits of inherited wealth without any of the legal exposures that typically destroy it. Let's do a rapid recap of your complete inheritance protection arsenal. You have Strategy 6, regular beneficiary designation updates to prevent asset hijacking by wrong people. Strategy 5, strategic payable on death accounts for small, immediate inheritance needs. Strategy 4, revocable living trust implementation to eliminate probate costs and delays. Strategy 3, irrevocable life insurance trusts to remove death benefits from your taxable estate. Strategy 2, asset protection trusts to shield inheritance from creditors and divorces. And Strategy 1, discretionary spendthrift trusts to provide ultimate comprehensive protection that never gives beneficiaries direct ownership. Now I want to hear from you in the comments below. Which of these 6 strategies surprised you the most? What's your biggest fear about your inheritance plan right now? Do you have your own story about family members fighting over inheritance or losing money to the legal system? Share your experience below because your story could be the protection someone else desperately needs to hear. Hit that subscribe button right now because every single week I release new videos packed with legal strategies that help you stay financially secure, protect your wealth from predators, and ensure your family never loses what you've worked your entire life to build. Remember, you are only one smart legal decision away from complete inheritance protection.